the more you can build momentum, the easier it is to communicate and be able to get buy-in and commitment across several different stakeholders.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 40 seconds, and we're going.
Never in the field of human conflict.
How do you measure such an astonishing moment in history?
You're listening to the bigQUEST podcast with Andy Murray. In a high-stakes, unpredictable world, every day is ripe with blue ocean adventures just waiting to be discovered. You need the mindset, the methods, and the motivation to lead with confidence into the unknown. Come along as we talk to today's top leaders, known for simplifying challenges, outsmarting variables, and inspiring greatness. Andy, welcome to this podcast episode.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Hey, I'm excited to wrap up the 5 big questions. Before we do, there's several great books that might be a little under the radar for most people, but they contain some really important bigQUEST thinking.
Yeah, there's been a couple that I've ran across this summer that I didn't realize were out there. I'm not even sure how I found out about them, but they really have influenced my thinking. One that was published in 2001 called Crossing the Unknown Sea. And it's work as a pilgrimage of identity. It's written by David White, an Englishman. And it was it's a great book for a couple of reasons. One, David is a poetry expert and writer, and so everything he writes in the book is done with great language, which I've always found that to be good. And most business books I pick up, I really don't end up reading. I just find them a lot of sameness, much of muchness.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And so, but this book really does a great job of dealing with uncertainty and all of the things that come into play when you set out on a journey or a quest and have to go through unpredictable adventures. And so, but he's also written it as a business consultant / poet, which is a great combination. And if you like a good read, that's
what a combination.
I
yeah.
would recommend.
Yeah. Interesting combination. Well, that's one of the books.
Very interesting.
I've actually heard you talk about
the other one is,
the other book even more. So what is that?
Yeah, the other book is called Uncharted, How to Map the Future Together by Margaret Heffernan. She's an entrepreneur, author, frequent TED speaker. It was published this year in 2020, September. And I found that to be very fascinating because she talks a lot about boy, it's hard to put it in words, but the unreliability of predicting.
Yeah.
And it's not quite the science that some might think. And the future is a bit more uncertain than we can predict. And the models for prediction, whether it's in industry and finance or forecasting or stock picking, we're just not as good at it as we could be where we think we are. So that's a 2-1. And one of her stories in there talks about how if you were to pick down the line Kramer's top picks for stocks, you would be most likely broken about 3 months. So even the best stock pickers it's pretty dicey in terms of how to predict the future. Yet we put so much into certainty and putting so much into being able to predict the future. And when you really get into the science behind it, it's not as predictable as we think.
Yeah. And I even remember back, in school coming up, people talking about mega trends and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of uncertainty really is taking hold, not only in the day-to-day life, but it's really showing up in terms of leading organizations or leading teams. Leadership is really shifting to embrace the idea that we can't know the future.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And I think COVID's only exacerbated that in spades.
Yeah. Change is here to stay. Well, the nature of these next 2 questions. So if you've been with us on the podcast, we've been working through the 5 big questions that really help you frame up a big quest when you start. We are covering the final 2 because the nature of these next 2 questions enables us to cover both on today's episode, on one episode, doesn't it? But that doesn't mean they're any less important.
No, not at all. It's just they're easy to understand and easy to get to. And I think may be harder to do at times, but as Mark Twain said in the overused quote, if I had more time, I made it shorter. This is our attempt to making it shorter so that you can grasp it and get on with it. But the first one is around making sure you have a real clarity around the single most important measure. Now, measures is something that we don't really like to talk about, but today's business demands it. And being able to understand how are you going to measure progress is just table stakes in trying to get financing or doing anything in the business world today. You have to have some understanding of where are you going to go and how you're going to get there and how you're going to measure it. And so that's why I feel like it's important to elevate measurement up to the same level as the other big questions, because the biggest thing you can do wrong, I think, in a quest is leave it to chance or leave it to someone else's narrative for them to describe how they're going to measure you, because it will happen. The question is, do you want to get in front of it and help write the narrative, or do you want to be done to by someone their description of how they're going to measure you? So those are two different things.
Yeah, well, I noticed that when this idea of measure comes up, there's a tendency as a project moves forward and an initiative unfolds to start measuring everything that you think of. And what I notice about the focus of the bigQUEST is that it's focusing on the single biggest measure. Why is it so important to have a single measure that you track?
Well, it's important because you can't really measure everything. And if you put too many measures in there, you get a bit of a snow blindness to what's important. And you want to find a measure that actually will help drive action. And when you get too many measures in there, you end up in a space where it's not really clear what to focus on that's going to drive the biggest action. And it gives you quite a number of outs. And I remember from my marketing days, we had loads of measures, too many measures, and we constantly struggled with paring those back because it's easy to add more. And if you don't like what your consistency measure is telling you on brand consistency, you pick cut through, because that means you cut through with something fresh and new. But there's always a measure there you can pick out that will tell you you're doing a good job, when in truth, you may not for sure know if you are, because you've got too many of them. So I think it's really important to start with one. You will probably, over the course of a quest, add more. So don't add them from the start, because they're not really relevant to driving the decision that you have to go. So it's important to do that. And I realize that it's probably also the most difficult thing to do, because anymore, getting back to the kind of world we live in with uncertainty and outcomes, and we'll talk more about right brain thinking, we're also after this area of empathy and showing empathy, having empathy, being empathetic. That is the business buzzword today. How do you measure that? And when you're also working on an outcome for that changes the lives of a customer, well, you're also looking for how do they feel about that outcome. So when you start measuring things like feeling, or you need to try to understand, did that make people happy? Did they make the customer happy? We're not really good at having metrics that you can put into spreadsheets that measure the effect of an emotional change. We can see behavioral changes, but it's harder to do that. So it does make the difficulty of dive, I won't kid you, a lot more difficult. Picasso once been quoted as saying, everyone wants to understand art. Why not try to understand the song of a bird? You don't have to understand a bird to love its song. And you start measuring emotions. Like, how do you measure love? How much do you love your child? Well, that's a pretty difficult thing to put a quantitative measure on. So what we're dealing with is moving into a world where human emotion, human design is getting to be more top of mind. And yet the way to measure that is increasingly elusive. So it is a tough thing to do. And if you could get a measure that I like to use, which has its downsides, is Net Promoter Score, which gets down to the most fundamental question is, was that experience good enough that I'd want to tell somebody about it or recommend it to my friend? And that has built into it some level of emotional satisfaction that you can measure. And if you're in the content space or publishing, I always like to look at and say, it's not how many likes you get, it's how many shares you get. Because if it's content working, that's a whole different level of an indicator for emotion than it is just how many likes you end up getting.
Yeah, that's great. And you're not saying don't measure a whole bunch of things. You're just saying identify what is the single most important measure that tracks your success. And I like the way that ties back to the outcome and the problem. There's this singularity that runs through all these 5 questions.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, the whole exercise here and the magic behind it is to keep it single. There's many chances to complicate things. Life's complicated as it is. We don't need to overcomplicate it. And the simpler, cleaner you can tie this thread through problem, outcome, the measurement, the barrier, and what we're going to get to next, the more you can build momentum, the easier it is to communicate and be able to get buy-in and commitment across several different stakeholders. And so it's a really important point to try to keep it as single as possible.
The Big Quest podcast with Andy Murray will return right after this break.
Today, more than ever, we need leaders who lead with the values of excellence, professionalism, innovation, and collegiality, which stand for EPIC. These are the values the Walton College of Business consistently demonstrate. I've worked with the Walton College as a business owner or executive for over 25 years, and I can tell you with certainty, the students we've hired, the exec ed programs, and the insights from their research have made an epic impact and continue to inspire me with new ways of thinking. Their vision to bring thought leadership to the challenges business face today, such as business integrity or how to be a customer-centric organization, that adds real value by creating conversations that connect people with organizations, faculty, industry, and practice. I put a link in the show notes to Dean Matt Waller's Be Epic podcast, where you'll hear stories and get great content that will inspire you to be epic.
We now return to the Big Quest podcast with Andy Murray. The 5th question in the 5 big questions exercise, which is what is one thing that everyone can do every single day? This question really takes us back to the first 4 again through that singularity. It boils down to how are you moving towards the outcome that you desire, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's my favorite question. It's my favorite question by far. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, in any organization, there's a daily rhythm that happens. And if you're not in the flow of that river, the flow of that rhythm of what happens day to day, it's really hard to raise a priority back to the consciousness of an organization in the moment and have real progress made. So people, we're just generally as humans not as good at multitasking as we tell ourselves. And so if you have a project where you're not looking at it every single day, you won't make the same kind of progress.
Yeah.
So every single day is about keeping it in the consciousness.
That's good. And I know you practice this a lot. I wonder if you could take us through some of the just wonderful examples that you've implemented, a single thing that everyone does every day, and just how it rallies everyone together, gets everybody on the same page, and keeps them there. I know that there's some great examples that you have from Asda and from Walmart. Yeah,
I can't take credit for implementing them on the examples I'm going to share, but I think Lee Scott, back in 1989, when he launched the sustainability pledge for Walmart, he put out a very big quest for their journey, and then came back and also challenged everyone to say, what could every single associate do every single day to create a personal sustainability pledge. It might be walk to work. It might be clean the retention pond. And it really created a focus for everyone to look for those little things, because the little things add up to big things. One of the great stories from that is an associate sitting in a break room and was looking at a vending machine and said, I wonder if that light bulb really needs to be on. So he found a way to get the thing open and unscrewed the light bulb, and guess what? Nothing changed. Sales of it, sodas and snacks, whatever's in it, didn't move. And that became something that others became aware of, and they scaled that to all stores. And sure enough, you're getting about a $10 million a year energy savings by that one act.
Wow.
And the idea of every single day, it puts it where the consciousness of everyone can think about the problem, look at it, and then come up with ideas in a way that that's what you want. You want lots of ideas from lots of places and people thinking about it in a way that could make progress. Now, it may not have to be the whole organization. It can be just a team, and a team can take on that or something you might want your team to work on every single day. And so that it doesn't, the idea that the core stakeholders you're looking for to have ideas and solutions have something to do to bring it forward in their life and in their work. And I had a mentee once who had a challenge with trying to keep up with the growth of the organization that he was running. And once we worked through the biggest barrier he had, which had to do with his team needed to upskill at a faster rate than the growth of the company because they had fallen too far behind in the skills of the team. So he identified the skills of the team and upskilling the team as the most important barrier to work on. And so he created some questions. We talked through 4 or 5 questions that he could ask of his team every single day in some form or fashion to reinforce the idea that they needed to get better. So question like, did we get better today? What did we learn new today? Questions that allowed them to think about skill development as a serious idea, but still in a way that's encouraging and drew attention to the idea that we need to get better and we need to improve and we need to be learning something new every day. So it was a great example of that.
Okay, well, speaking of one thing that you do every day, we have a very interesting interview coming up with a guy named Mike Bates. Tell us about him.
Yeah, the Atlantic Grappler. You'll get to hear about him. He's a guy that has a very big quest in front of him to row solo across the Atlantic in 2022. And it's quite a 2-year quest for him to do that. And there's a lot of preparation required, for sure. A lot of challenges, a lot of dragons he's going to slay to get there. And we're catching him probably a quarter of the way through this particular journey. And one thing that strikes me about what Mike's doing is how he has to commit every single day to what will end up being a 3-year type journey. And some of the routines that he's created for himself to do something every single day is quite impressive. And his point being that once you get, and we'll hear more from him directly, but once you're out on that ocean and you're rowing every single day, it's not just about the physical bit, it's the mental bit. And what every single day does for him is create a mental stamina and resilience to thinking about where he's trying to go with this quest and how he needs to be thinking about it every single day. It'll take him through the problems and do that mind training now. And that's why I think it's so important to do that. And, one of the things I've seen, Ben, that is showing up quite a bit is this desperate need for more right brain thinking. And right brain thinking, and we'll have a chance to talk more about this in future episodes, but right brain thinking is something that's needed when there's a lot of uncertainty, when you don't have all the answers and you're looking for something new. And something new is not going to come from something you've just done in the past. But to have that kind of skill to think new and think different, it requires an exercise of the mind. And you have to exercise and build that mind. And I've noticed with COVID that there was a thinking going in the early days. Gosh, I'm going to finally get a chance to think. I don't like being in lockdown, but now I'm going to go do this new thing with my life, or I'm going to, great chance to explore a new hobby, learn to paint. And for so many people, nothing happens. And the reason for that, one of the main reasons for that is you can't just start from scratch your right brain thinking and take it up to full speed to match how well you exercise the left brain. So for me, I think it's really important to have daily exercises where you continue to build that muscle so that you can exercise a right brain at full strength whenever you need it, versus only looking at it as something that's accessible during a downtime. Because when you get to that downtime and you haven't exercised that brain, the right side of your brain, it's not going to be strong enough. And you'll sit there wondering, what do I do with this time? Flipping through a magazine or something, or scrolling through Instagram or Facebook. So a way to do that, there's several things we could do and talk about to strengthen the right brain. But one of the things I like to do, and I made it an every single day practice, is every day on the way to work or the way home, in the commute. I don't have to commute much now, but when I was commuting, I would look for one thing, try to observe one thing, see one thing that I had never noticed before, and be able to recount that by the end of the day. And so you would be amazed, just absolutely amazed, when you intentionally say, I'm going to pay attention in a different way than just put myself on autopilot. The power of observation begins to grow as a practice.
Hmm.
And paying attention and practicing paying attention is one of the key secrets of creating new connections. And the left brain loves to just go on autopilot, make life easy for the brain, just get through it. Well, in all honesty, that's not going to strengthen your right brain. But it's a fun little simple exercise to say, did I notice anything on the way to work today I'd never seen before? And I promise you, put that mindset in place, because I think every single day is as much a mindset as it is a method. And the mindset behind it is the training of the mind to be able to pay attention. The most important piece of being creative is paying attention and making connections between two different things that no one else has seen before. It's not some genius level of ideation capability, but it comes through the power of observation. If you put some kind of habit in your life that creates a desire or a need to do observation, that's really important. In the training of artists and writers, one of the best workshop type development training exercises for writers to write, and especially beginning writers, and even seasoned writers still do it, is take 3 sheets of paper out and write 3 sheets of copy, one of the first things you do in the morning. And it doesn't matter, it's whatever's on your mind. Just get it down in writing. And that act of writing could be totally gibberish. But what it does is it helps you unload the concerns and the ideas, and it's a creative process. And your brain on the right side is active through that whole time. And it lets you to put away some of the worries and things that might be distracting you, and it frees the mind. I do that every single day. I take 3 pages and just write in them, and I don't go back and read them, don't care to read them. It doesn't matter. It's a matter about getting the brain in a place that it can start to create. But that's a habit and practice that I use to help develop the right brain thinking and the skills that go with it.
Yeah. And it's interesting how Mike Bates is just naturally like that. You know, the guy that's rowing across the Atlantic. He's never rowed in his life. So it's not like, here's this rower who's now ready to take on the grand challenge. And he sort of has taken that whole approach, as we'll see when we talk to him coming up. But how hard is that for, I think of you as a pretty right-brained person, even though you're in a lot of situations in your career that are typically thought of as left-brain leadership or conducive to left-brain thinkers. What would you say to the person who maybe is a little more left-brain in their thinking, and you're throwing at them some of these exercises? What happens? Is there the same benefit that they're going to get from trying some of these things?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're still whole brain people. The right brain's always there. It just gets a bit suffocated from all of the left brain exercises. The biggest misbelief for heavy left brain thinkers and people that work in a left brain field of work every day is that if they just get some downtime, they don't have time. And if I just get some downtime, I'll be able to do this really, really well. Well, that's not true, because it's a muscle. It's a learned practice to use your right brain consistently and to cultivate that so that it can be productive when you get those downtimes. And so the thing that's the barrier is just the misbelief that it's just a matter of being able to get some time off. And I can't get time off because I'm so busy. And I'm working so much. I'm so busy. I don't have time off. And therefore, who's got time to sit around and think? Well, I'm not talking about sitting around thinking. I'm talking about like your drive to work, or the train ride to work, or the subway, or wherever it is, whatever it is. It's in those routine moments where you can start to still practice ways to create observational powers. And like I said before, creativity and right brain is really about the power to pay attention.
It's great. And for the next several episodes, we're going to talk to some people. We're going to do some interviews with some of the different people you've met throughout your career, and some of the people that have been writing some of these books that we've been talking about. And I think that's going to go a long way toward really showing what these 5 big questions look like in action. I wonder. Oh yeah.
And through research to get to this point, I've been pressure testing and working through and getting some of the best thinking and best thought leaders up against these 5 questions. And to a person, I would hear words like, or phrases like, I wish I had known that back then. Yes, I see how these 5 things come together as a language and are codified to explain why I was successful at a certain typical big challenge that they took on. And you're going to hear that from Tom Muccio, from Daniel Eckert. Many that we've talked to will verify and validate and give stories to back up how the singularity and the clarity of an outcome, the problem, the barrier, the measure, and how that plays such an important role in the habits and practices every day. Those 5 things are absolutely the compass that will guide you and is so necessary to take on bigger things. There's a lot more to come around how we slay dragons and all the other elements to that, but these particular 5 are super powerful.
Yeah. Well, so before we close here, you're really on a quest to help people because you're actually opening up your calendar. I can see the evidence from that. You're actually opening up your calendar to spend time with listeners.
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole point of doing this is so that others can create bigQUEST opportunities to do meaningful work for themselves, have bigger outcomes, and do it for their teams. And so that's the aim for me.
Yeah.
And if I can create 15-minute windows of time, and I just found out through my career that a lot of times people get stuck on one big challenge or one question they have. And if you can spend 15 minutes just talking about that one thing to serve as an unlock, then it can go on. So these are like 15-minute unlocking sections where together we'll sit down, we'll try to unpick the lock, figure out how it's got stuck, and help get unstuck with probably an insight or an idea or just the chance for someone to vent out and say, I'm really stuck here. I'm not sure how this works. So that's what I've done, about 20 hours a week, just dedicated those 15-minute sessions where we can work through something that you're stuck on, because I really do want to see you be successful.
And this is for listeners. This is for people listening right now. If you want,
yes.
If you want to sign up for your slot with Andy Murray, go to the bigQUEST website. There's a place on there where you can fill out the bigQUEST, the 5 big questions that you're working through, and you submit that, and Andy will schedule time with you. If you're one of the people, I guess it's first come, first serve, right? You don't have time for every single person that requests, but that's a fantastic offer. And I think it's a gesture of just where your heart is on this, that you're really trying to help induce this sort of thinking of bigQUEST thinking, using your right brain and leadership, because there's been such a fixation on like kind of left brain organizational thinking that just doesn't really fit with where we're headed, especially coming out of a COVID year.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, 100%. Yes, I look forward to it. I hope people do take me up on it. I love mentoring and giving back any way I can to help people get through these stuck moments.
That's great. Well, don't be surprised if you see me signed up for some time with you to talk about that. Thanks for listening to the bigQUEST podcast with Andy Murray. Make sure to head over to bigQUEST.com to download our free checklist to launch your own bigQUEST. On the website, you'll find resources and ideas around the method, mindset, and motivation concepts behind the bigQUEST framework. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment. We'd love to hear what resonated with you today. And if you want to share this podcast, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, Google Play, and anywhere you listen to audio. Our goal with this podcast is to help passionate leaders think differently and make meaningful change. Be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified when the next episode goes live. Until next time, I'm Ben Ortliff here with Andy Murray, reminding you to think big and quest on.